So, good morning, good afternoon, or even good evening, again, depending on what time you're listening to this recording. So, we turn now to a new module, which we call equilibrium. So, if you're a student of physics or chemistry, or if you've done a bit of science before, the word is familiar to you, okay? But in economics, equilibrium has a different definition, although it has a very similar idea. So today, our background for today is Istanbul, Turkey. So this is the Grand Bazaar, which is one of the oldest and one of the largest closed markets in the world. Okay, so this was built during the 14th century and is still operating up to today. And so we'll be talking about mainly about markets today. Okay, and the role that markets play. So let me just start with showing you some pictures of markets across the world. So I just want to emphasize here that markets in themselves are not unique to any sort of civilization or to any time, people's times, okay? There are some peoples that don't have markets, but for most civilizations out there that have existed in human history, we have records of them practicing markets, okay? So our background today, once again, Grand Bazaar, which is Istanbul, which in Turkey, okay? And here's a picture of Tukiji fish market in Tokyo, the largest fish market in the world. And if you want to see how large that is, there you go. There's a photo of that. And you've got even in Morocco, right? In Marrakesh, you've got you've got another large market there. And so yeah, this is in Africa, and you also have the biggest fruit market, which is in France. And you also have, of course, you also got these more gimmicky ones, like in Thailand, the floating markets. If you've been to Thailand, it's one of the things that they usually highlight that you should be doing, aside from the railway market. So again, there's See, we see markets in Asia, we see markets in Europe, we see markets in Africa, and we also see markets. So this is a recreation, even during before the Europeans arrived in America. So this is a market in the Aztec Empire, recreation, of course, because they didn't have cameras at that time. So markets are something that human civilization has had. And so, what exactly is a market? Okay, and so we'll be exploring today that the market is basically where supply and demand can come together. Okay, so let's just have a recap first on microeconomics, because we're still in this module, a unit of microeconomics. So again, microeconomics is the branch of economics focusing on the interaction between households and firms. It's a tiny one, okay, not tiny. It's micro. It's a focused it's a focused sort of economics instead of the aggregate one, which is macroeconomics. So specifically, what we are studying is demand and supply. So these are the market forces that are responsible for markets. The reason why markets exist is because this is where demand and supply come together and meet. All right, and we'll be showing this mathematically and graphically today. So, but don't worry, we'll try to make things simple as possible. Again, I want you to learn the concepts here. So again, we've seen the slide before, the next slide. We are building up to this picture, which is perhaps the most famous image in all of economics. Again, this is the third time probably you've seen the slide. And basically, the most famous image of all is the demand and supply curve, a supply-demand curve, okay? So that's what it is again. So last time we did demand, last time we did supply, and now what we used to do is we treat demand separately from supply, and now what we're going to do for this session and for this module is that we're going to combine both together. So now what happens when demand and supply interact? And where does this interact? Where do households and firms interact? In the market. Okay. You might have the traditional notion of a market being, a wet market or something like that, or like a background here. But even like a grocery store, that's a market, because that is where things are being exchanged. Okay. So let's have a recap of supply and demand. So the supply is a desire to sell a particular product or service, okay? And demand is a willingness to buy a particular good or service. So supply is how much I'm willing to, how much, goods am I willing to sell, and producer is willing to sell. A demand is how much, as a buyer, I'm willing to buy. And we've seen this picture before. Basically, if you got this household or this person here, and you've got this business, a producer here, the producer gives the household some good or service, right? And then in compensation for that, the household or the person pays the producer some sort of money, some sort of compensation. And again, this is what we would call a market. Anywhere where there is an exchange of goods for compensation, that is what we call a market. Okay? Now, we've got two laws, right? We got the law of supply and law of demand. So law of supply, as price goes up, quantity supplied by the producer goes up and vice versa. I.e., if I increase the price, the producer would want to produce more in order to capture more profits. Law of demand, on the other hand, is the other way around. As a buyer, if things get more expensive, I would want to buy less. Or if things become cheaper, then I'd want to buy more. So you see there's this tension, right? Because we've got the same price, but when price increases, for producers, they want to produce more. For buyers, they want to consume less. So there's that tension. And we'll see that later on. And of course, the biggest way that we've been doing this so far in the lectures is through what we call a supply and demand curve. So let's just have a recap onto what it is, okay? So let's start with the supply curve, all right? So the supply curve, you've got on the x-axis the quantity of the goods supplied, and on the y-axis, you've got the price of the good. And again, law of supply, if I increase the price, if I go up here, the quantity of the goods supplied will also go up. So you've got this upward sloping curve, all right? So it's upward sloping, okay? And demand curve, which is now on the x-axis, this is the quantity of the good demanded, and also on the y-axis, you still got price. So it's still the same, it's still price. And again, the law of demand states that as we increase price, we decrease the amount of good that we want. So price here increases, so from here to here, let's say from this point to this point, that's an increase in price. But notice the quantity of the good has decreased. It's gone down, okay? So you've got this downward sloping curve. All right, I hope that's clear. Now, notice both have the word quantity of the good, okay? One is supplied, one is demanded, but in the end, they're both quantities of a good. So what do you think we could do? We could bring them together and fuse both together so we get the supply and demand curve, okay? So this is exactly what it is. So in this time, on our x-axis, we just have the quantity of the good, okay? And on the y-axis, it's still the price of the good. In supply and demand, both the y-axis are both price, so we might as well just make it price, right? It doesn't change. On the x-axis, it's just quantity of the good. And so we bring our supply curve over there and a demand curve over there. And there you go. That's the supply curve and that is the demand curve. And for the purposes of these lectures, just to make things clearer, usually we just have both of these curves in one color. But for this set of lectures, what we're going to do is I'm going to make the supply curve blue and I'm going to make the demand curve red. And if there are any shifts, as we'll see later on, we'll also introduce more colors. Okay, this is just to make things simpler and easier for your understanding, so you don't get confused. Again, although it's really simple, any curve on the supply-demand curve that's upward sloping, that's basically increasing, that's a supply, and anything that's decreasing, that's the demand curve. Okay. Now, notice again. Just a reminder, the curves don't have to be straight lines, okay? They can be any curve as long as it follows the law of supply and the law of demand. So if it's increasing, it's supply. If it's decreasing, it's demand. However, for this case, we just use straight lines. Again, concept, it's easier to do it that way. Now, notice that the curves intersect, okay? If you got two lines, especially if one's upward sloping, one's downward sloping, they're bound to intersect at a single point. Okay, this is basic maths, but yeah. So basically, if you got two lines, they have to intersect because these lines can't be parallel because again they don't have the same slope. One is upward, one is downward sloping. Anyways, sorry for that aside. Basically, they intersect at a point, and so we'll be asking, okay, what is this intersection about? All right, and that's what we'll be thinking about today. So let's start off with a case study. Let's start with souvenirs. Okay, so here's some Vespa souvenirs, keychains, t-shirts, and all of that. So we start off with a simple example. Let's imagine a market where there's only one buyer and one seller. Okay, simple as that, right? So if the guy doesn't buy, that's it. If the person doesn't sell, there's no one else to sell to. Okay, and there's no one else to buy from. Now I'm going to use a real person here. This is Jared, good friend of mine. We used to go souvenir hunting before when we on trips abroad. This was back in the day, long days ago. And let's say our seller is Souvenirs R Us. Okay, Toys R Us is dead, so I think I can now use their name, the R Us name, RIP Toys R Us. Okay, so we got Jared, one buyer, and Souvenirs R Us, one seller. And again, Jared can only buy from Souvenirs R Us, and Souvenirs R Us can only sell to Jared. There's no one else to. Okay, again, this is unrealistic, but it simplifies our analysis. Okay, and later on we'll see that we can just extend this. All right, so let's start with Jared and his demand curve. So again, you've got quantity on the x-axis, right, and then you've got price on the y-axis. All right, so let's just draw that, and again, demand curve is downward sloping, so let's just draw that line over there. Let's say that's his demand curve, and again, in economics, in later courses, you'll be able to determine how we construct the demand curve. Okay, there's a lot of statistics and a lot of fundamental analysis involved, so we're not going to get into that. Again, we're here for the concept. So supply curve for Souvenirs R Us, again, we draw quantity on the x-axis, and then we got the price on the y-axis. And again, to draw the supply curve, we know it's upward sloping, so we'll just draw it as a straight line. Okay, and again, to draw a demand supply curve, we've both got quantity here, so we can just merge the two graphs together, which is what we'll do in the next slide. Alright, so this is Jared, and that's his demand curve, and now we put in Souvenirs R Us, and that's their supply curve. Alright, so that's what it is. Okay, simple as that. Okay, now we're going to get into a bit of graphs here, so please do bear with me. I will try to explain things slowly as we go along, but please feel free to rewind some of the bits in case I speak a bit too fast, or if things aren't that clear. Okay, so this is how we're going to be setting things up. Okay, so we got price. For single price, we're going to look at each single prices, and we'll look at that certain price. How much does Jared want to buy? What's the quantity demanded? And what is the quantity supplied that the supplier is willing to sell? Remember, at a certain price, the law of demand and the law tells us that there is a certain quantity that the consumer would want to buy. And at a certain price as well, there's a certain quantity that suppliers want to sell. Okay, so we'll be using this as a logo for the keychain. And again, for this one, we'll be using a hollow logo, because that means that Jared doesn't have it yet, but he wants to have this much. And again, this one is a full keychain because the supplier has it, right? And of course, we'll be using arbitrary units of money, so we'll just call it monies. Again, we're here for the concept, so I'm not gonna bog you down with specific currencies. It's kind of not helpful at the moment, so we'll just keep it at that. Okay, now let's start. So what happens if the price is 6 monies? Okay, so just on the graph analysis, let's look here. So the price is on the y-axis, right? So 1, 2, 3, all the way to 6. So you can draw a line there, and it intersects the demand and supply curve at 2 different points. Okay, so let's look for the quantity demanded. So quantity demanded, let's see where 6 intersects. It intersects here, and now we can draw a straight. So put an X there, and we can draw a straight line down, so we see that at a price of 6, the quantity demanded would be 4 keychains or 4 souvenirs. Okay, so that's how you do it. Look here, so draw a straight line, then put an X there, and then just look at the corresponding value in the x-axis. Now the supply curve, we do the same. So the line of price of 6 intersects here, then we draw a straight line down, and we see that the quantity supplied by the seller, by Souvenirs R Us, is 12. So we'll put that in there. Okay, I hope that's clear. Okay, so we're in the market. There's an exchange that's going to happen. So what's going to happen? Well, again, we're going to talk about the free market. So this is what consumers and suppliers are willing in their own ways, to exchange. So Jared only wants 4. Souvenirs R Us is willing to, wants to sell 12. So what happens? Only 4 will be exchanged, right? Because we're not forcing anybody here. This is all their own volition. Jared just wants to buy 4. That's it. Okay. And so what happens to the rest of this? What happens to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? What happens to the 8 keychains? They get unsold. The surplus, that's what we call in economics a surplus. They're unsold merchandise. And again, because we only have one buyer, that means this is basically lost profit for the producer, because there's no one else to sell to. Okay, and yeah. So let's look at Jared. So Jared's happy because he got what he wanted, right? At that price, he got what he wanted. But the producer, Souvenirs are Us, they're not really happy because they've got all of this excess that they can't make a profit from, because there's not no one else to sell to, and that there's too much, so there's a surplus. Okay. Now let's look at another example. So let's have 3 money now, and again, so y-axis, there's 3 with draw a straight line there. And so we start with quantity demanded, right? So the demand curve is the red one. So even though it intersects here first, but we'll look at this one first because we're talking about demand first. So we intersect here, so we draw an X there, and then we draw a line straight down, a vertical line, straight down to the X-axis, and we see the quantity demanded is 10. So at the price of 3 monies, Jared would want to buy 10 keychains. Simple enough, I hope. Now let's look at the Souvenirs are Us. This is the supply curve, so this is for them, the quantity supplied, that's blue. So this we draw a line there because that's where it intersects. The price of 3, and we draw a straight line down, and we see that they're only willing to sell 6. Okay, so an exchange. Now an exchange happens, right? So the Souvenirs are Us sells 6 to Jared, and see what happens. There's still 4 more keychains that Jared would want to buy, but the supplier says I only want to sell you 6, because at that price I can only sell you 6. I can't sell you 10, I can't sell you 7, I can only sell you 6. So what happens? Unfulfilled demand. Jared isn't happy, okay, because there's now a shortage. He wanted to buy 10, but now there's unfulfilled demand. He only was able to get 6, so there's a shortage of 4, right? Because there's 4 keychains that he would have wanted to get, but he didn't. So Jared is not happy because unfulfilled demand, there's a shortage, but the producer is happy because he was able to sell what he wanted to sell at that price. And now I know it might sound a bit fickle that Jared is not happy for keychains, okay, but imagine this could be any market. Imagine if this is a market for food, and that's the amount of food that a family would really want to have for their needs, and then the market is not willing to supply them because the prices are really low. So when you say sad, it's not. It can mean that they're just sad, but it could also mean that an unfulfilled need. There's a need that's unfulfilled. Could be somebody starving or whatever like that. So that's what happens, okay? Because suppliers are only willing to sell because, again, it might just be that that's the capacity at the current price. That's what it is, okay? Now let's look at the third example. What happens if the price is 4? Okay, so again, we look at the y-axis, that's over here. We draw a straight line, and it just so happens, of course I chose this myself, that price of 4 is where the lines intersect. So there's the intersection line. And so quantity demanded, well, it's the same point, right? So we can just draw a straight line down. So 8. So the quantity demanded, because that's the demand curve here, that will be 8, and the quantity supplied will also be 8, because again, that's where they intersect. So I mean, if you draw, yeah, so basically they lie on top of each other there. So let's have an exchange. What happens? Oh, look what happens. There is no surplus or shortage. The amount at the intersection, right? The amount of the quantity of keychains demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. So there are neither surpluses nor shortages. And so what happens? Jared is happy because he got exactly how much he wanted for that price, and the Souvenirs are happy because there's no excess merchandise. There's no surplus for him, and for Jared there's no shortage. So both buyers are happy, and this is at the intersection point. Okay. So that is what we call the equilibrium price. Okay, so this is where the word equilibrium comes in. So this is the equilibrium price at the intersection point, and the quantity demanded and supplied at that point is what we call the equilibrium quantity. And now for you people who like a bit more mathsy stuff, I'm not going to dwell on this, by the way. Equilibrium price is P sub E or P star. Equilibrium quantity is small q sub E. We're using small right now because we're talking about one buyer and one seller. Okay, yeah, so that's what it is. Okay, we'll be talking about that later. For the rest of you guys, if you don't really want the maths, it's fine. Concept. I'm here to teach you concept, not about the maths. But for people who want to do a bit more maths, that's the way to do it. All right, then let's have a look. Let's make this a bit more general. So if price is above the equilibrium price, okay. So again, so we're gonna use purple for equilibrium. So equilibrium price, once again, the price where the two lines intersect, where the supply and demand curve intersects. Okay, so that's our equilibrium price. Now, if the current price, which is in black, is above that, what happens again? We get a surplus. There's more supply than demand. All right. And for the mathsy folk over there, the maths way to do it is if P is our current price, if P is greater than P sub E, that implies we get a surplus. Okay. Now the question is by how much? All right. So by how much do we get a surplus for? Now this is very simple. What we could do is simply you can imagine this as a number line, right, of number of keychains that we produce, and at the current price we supply 12 keychains, right? So basically that's where the line intersects, and at the current price Jared will demand 4 because that's where the intersection is, right? Basically I've just written this out as a number line. Imagine that these pieces are individual numbers. It's basically just basic counting. And as you can see, when we do the exchange, these 4 will go here because that will be fulfilled. And then we got the rest, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we got 8 of a surplus. Okay, so how do we do this quickly? Well, basically, that's what did we do? Basically, we took this and subtracted this from this, right? So we took the supply, which is 12, and then we subtracted that from the demand, which is 4. Okay, so that's basically it there. So 12 minus 4, that will give us 8. So we got a surplus of 8. Now, if you're again for the maths people, Q sub surplus, the amount of quantity of surplus is equal to the quantity supplied at the given price minus the quantity demanded at the given price. Okay, that's for you mathsy folk. All right, so that's the surplus amount. Basically, it's this distance from here to here. That's what it is. That's the surplus amount. The distance between the supply curve and the demand curve. That's a surplus amount. Okay. Similarly, if the price is below the equilibrium price, so again we draw our equilibrium price as where the price where they intersect. Let's draw our current price over there. Again, it's anywhere below. We get shortage, right? So the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied. So question is by how much again? And again for the mathsy people, if P is less than P sub E, we get shortage. So to know by how much, we do the same thing again. Imagine we draw these on the number line, and again quantity supplied goes all the way to the blue line, and then quantity demanded goes all the way to the red line. Okay, and so now we stop there because that's where they meet and that's where they meet. Now this gets fulfilled, and so what happens left is the remainder, wherever the difference is, that's the shortage. All right, and similarly as well, so we do the same thing. So we draw this time because demand is greater now than supply. We start from demand, so at the current price that will be 10, the demand will be 10, and the supply will be 6. So what we do, we subtract, right? So 10 minus 6, that will give us a shortage of 4. And again, this is just the distance between this and this. Okay, there we go. That's a shortage amount. All right. And again, for the mathsy folk over there, by the way, this is just a way to express things mathematically. Honestly, it's just common sense, to be honest. But sometimes we just want to show that we can do things mathematically rigorously, as they would say it. So this is why we have this. So quantity shortage is equal to the quantity demanded at given price minus the shortage quantity at the given price. Basically, it's just a subtraction. That's a fancy way to say subtract the bigger number from the smaller number. Okay, that's what it is. You won't get tested on the mathsy bits, but for you guys who might want a bit more maths in your econ subject, there you go. Okay, but we'll just stick to this. Okay. Right, so question is now, can we extend the analysis to a market of many players? Can we have more than one buyer and one seller? Of course we can. Okay, answer is yes. However, there are some few considerations. First of all, quantities involved get bigger. Because of course you've got multiple people buying, you've got multiple people selling, so they're probably going to sell more and they're going to buy more. So on the x-axis, what happens now is our quantity demanded increased. Now, if you see a graph like this and you see the squiggly line over here, that means I'm skipping a lot of numbers, because notice that this is 0 and this is already 500. So I'm just skipping a lot of numbers because it's way too big and I can't, like these numbers are not that important. So we'll start off with 500 and all of that. The point is the numbers are bigger. Okay, that's my point. Price, however, doesn't get bigger because we are dealing with price per good. Okay, so the y-axis, the price will still stay the same because we're dealing with price per good. If you've got so many sellers and you've got so many buyers, the price per good will probably still stay the same, right? There might be a bit more movement, but in the end, this price per good will be the same. Okay, the price of milk will be roughly the same if you're in a small grocery compared to when you're in a supermarket, right? There might be a bit of difference, but it's not like times 100 or something like that. Okay, so that's our supply and demand curve. So again, supply is the blue one increasing, demand is the red one decreasing, and our equilibrium price is again where they intersect. And however, there's also the exit and entry effects, okay, depending on price. So before, we used to explain in a single market that the supply and demand changes based on whether or not I can produce as much as this, right, or I can buy as much as this. But now there's also the possibility that at the current price, some people just don't want to buy. For example, if the price is a bit too high, then if you remember from the demand module, some people might just not want to buy souvenirs. They think that's way too expensive. I'll buy something else. So I won't buy. And for suppliers, they might say, well, I can get into another business that's cheaper and where I can get more profit if the price is too low, so I'll get out. Okay, so this entry and exit. But again, the analysis is pretty much the same. It's just how we get the demand and supply curves that are different. So again, there's a very small fine detail. So for the mathematicians out there, so for the rest of you guys, feel free to skip like, I don't know, 30 seconds or a minute or so. Anyways, so quantity demanded by a single buyer is small q sub d. Quantity demanded is big Q sub d. So basically, if you got a single buyer, we use lowercase. If you got a total aggregate one, you add all of them together, you get a big Q. And same for supply. Small q sub s is quantity supplied by a single producer. Big Q sub s is a total quantity supplied. Now, if you're doing physics or if you're doing anything to do with science, small usually means per mass or per unit, okay? Whereas capital usually means a total. Okay, so it's the same in economics. Per unit of seller or buyer or seller, we have small q, but the total is the big Q. Okay, so we use lower and uppercase depending on whether lowercase, per unit, uppercase, total. Okay, all right. Okay, so welcome back to those who skipped the maths corner bit. That's fine. So let's have. So what happens again if the current price is above the equilibrium price? So I'll just drill this into you guys. I'm really sorry if I keep repeating this, but it's good to just remember. So we get a surplus, right? And the question is by how much? So we take this, we subtract. So we subtract 1,100 by the intersection here, which is by 500, right? So where it intersects, so surplus, big number minus small number, basically 1,700 minus 500. We subtract those two guys and we get 600, and that's our surplus. Okay, so usually that's how we do it. So that's literally the distance between this and this. Okay, 1,100 minus 500. All right. Other way around, if the price is below the equilibrium price, what do we get? We get a shortage, right? Demand is bigger than supply. And how much again? Big number minus small number, so we get intersection here, that's 1,000, and we get the intersection here, that's 600, and we subtract both, then we get 400, all right? And that's literally our shortage. Okay, so that's literally just a distance between here and here. Okay, I hope that's clear enough. So, notey bits. So, surplus is when there is an excess in supply because quantity demanded is less than quantity supplied. Shortage is when there is an excess in demand because quantity demanded is more than quantity supplied. Okay, and remember, big number minus small number. Okay, that's what it is. All right, so equilibrium. Why do we call it equilibrium anyway? So what is the idea behind equilibrium? I understand equilibrium in physics, I understand equilibrium in chemistry, so what is equilibrium? Why is equilibrium here? Let's have a look first at the dictionary definitions of equilibrium. So equilibrium is defined as from Merriam-Webster. I like this definition: a state of adjustment between opposing or divergent influences or elements. Say what now? Let's go to another dictionary. Dictionary.com says this is an equal balance between any powers or influences, etc. Equality of effect. And from the Cambridge Dictionary, which is, I think, has the best definition, it is a state of balance. Perfectly balanced, as all things should be. I should have put a Thanos meme there. I am so sorry. Yes. So basically, it is yes, perfectly balanced, as all things should be. So that's equilibrium, basically. Is when the forces of supply and demand balance each other out. That's what it is. Okay, we'll see what that means. So let's have a case study: bananas, and we'll use an aggregate market. So let's use a big market here. So you got the supply and demand curve there, and you've got the equilibrium price there again, as usual, this intersection. So what happens when the current price is above the equilibrium price? Again, we get a surplus, and the surplus is 300. So 400 minus 100, big number minus small number, right? 400 minus 100, we get 300 surplus. So what happens to the 300 unsold bananas? Again, there's nowhere else to sell this, because this is already the market for all our buyers. What happens to them? They rot. And so what happens? They're basically lost profit, right? So what would be the logical thing for a seller to do? Okay, so they can't get any more customers in the market, because that's already what it is. But what they could do, right, is if they decrease the price, so the demand, the more and more people might want to buy bananas, right? So what would you do as a seller to unload this? You'd want to decrease the price. There would be a downward pressure in the price, because I need to get rid of these surpluses. Otherwise, they'll all rot, spoil, and I'll lose money. Okay, so if I want to gain money and I don't want to lose this profit, I need to decrease my price so I can attract all these other people. Okay. Now, let's say what happens if the current price is below the equilibrium price? What happens then? So this time, there's a shortage of 200. So again, big number minus small number, 350 minus 150. So what happens to all of that? So how much money does the seller make from the 200 bananas shortage? So there's 200 extra bananas people would want to buy, but you're not willing to sell that. Okay, so what happens to that money? You don't get any of that. Okay, because you don't sell it. Okay. So what happens now? So what also happens in the market? The queue will start to form, like a line will start to form. People will start to wait, because there's so much more demand than supply, right? Imagine it's just like one of those things where people queue up for new shoes, like whenever I don't know, Air Jordans come in, the new ones. Sorry, I'm not a shoe fan, but yeah, you see people like lining up. So there's because there's going to be a shortage. There's only a certain amount of this available in the market, so people are going to be queuing up for this. And so how do you relieve that pressure? Well, that means, right, if you're the supplier, I could get away with offering a higher price because I'm already selling out all the stuff that I make. So if I jack the prices up, then people are still going to buy it. There is also the question of fairness, but again, we're just going to stick with the rational model. Behavioral economics tells us a different story, but in the rational world, there's going to be an effect to jack prices up. And I mean, you see that as well with collector's items and all of that. The more scarce something is, the less things people can supply, the more I can jack up the price. So there's an upward pressure in the price, okay? So let's just summarize what we did in the previous two slides. So if the price is above the equilibrium price, we get a surplus, right? So there's a current price, there's equilibrium price. There's a downward pressure in price. Sellers want to get rid of this surplus, so what they do, they just reduce the price. Here, get it for whatever price. So what happens to the current price? It goes down. Okay, so it keeps going down. All right. So there's a downward pressure. Now, on the other hand, if the prices are below the equilibrium price, i.e., there's a shortage, there's more demand than supply, what happens? Consumers and producers are willing to jack up the price because consumers are willing to pay that price. So there's an upward pressure in price. Okay, so there's an upward pressure. So the question is, until where? So until where does the downward pressure go? Until where does the upward pressure go? Okay, next slide. So at the equilibrium price, there are no surpluses because there is no downward price pressure, right? Because there's no surplus in equilibrium price. We've seen that before. So there's no pressure to decrease my price because I'm selling all that I have. At the same time, there's also no shortages. People are getting what they want, right? So there is no upward pressure in price as well. So what happens in equilibrium? In equilibrium, things stay where they are. Okay, so that's why we call it the equilibrium price. So another way to think of this, and I got this from another video, basically you can think of this as like a ball in a bowl, where if the ball is over here, okay, then its tendency would be to roll down. If it was over here to the left, it would go roll to the right. But if it was here, right in the center, in the middle of the ball, it wouldn't go anywhere else because it's already where it is, right? It's equilibrium. It's already in equilibrium. So in the same way, when the market is in equilibrium, is at the equilibrium price, it doesn't want to go up. The price doesn't want to go up. The price doesn't want to go down. Because sellers are happy because all the merchandise is sold out. Buyers are happy because they don't have any more unfulfilled wants. So that's the equilibrium. That's the magic place where there is no changes anymore. And things that are not in equilibrium, like this ball over here, they want to move towards equilibrium. Okay, in the same way the market, that's how it works. Okay, the previous explanation I told you, there's a queue or there's things that get rotten, that's all in effect because that's all the reason why I would want to move to equilibrium. And this leads us to the golden rule in free market economics. In a free market, the price will always tend towards the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. Okay, that's always the rule when it comes to a free market. And of course, you'll see in your next lectures, which I will not be teaching you, there are ways that the market is impeded towards the equilibrium. Actually, there is government intervention as well. So I will also be teaching you ways in which we can't reach the free market. Okay, so I'm only here to tell you that this is where the market tends to. Whether or not this is the best thing for society to do, there's many different schools of thoughts in economics, and this is where a lot of people disagree in economics. Is the free market the best system that we could have? And one side will give you an argument, another side will give you a different argument. I'm not here to tell you that. Okay, all I'm here to tell you is at least what most economists would agree on. Given a market freely, the price will tend towards equilibrium price. There are ways that hamper equilibrium price. For example, we discussed that in the bonus content, information asymmetry, behavioral economics. But if the market was free from all of those influences, we will tend towards an equilibrium price, okay, in a free market. So notey bits. So equilibrium price is basically when quantity demanded is equals to quantity supplied. So no surplus, no shortage. And this is the price, again, no shortages, no surplus, everyone's happy. So the price that free markets tend to, okay, so free markets tend to go to equilibrium. And equilibrium quantity is just the corresponding quantity for the price. So final bit, road ahead. So with this part we saw what the equilibrium point means. Next we'll discuss what happens to the equilibrium point when we have shifts. Okay, and then we have a bonus tutorial video for that I will be uploading after the 4 parts because time. And then part 3 we'll talk about government interventions, and finally we'll talk about elasticity. So this set of lectures will be a bit longer than usual, and I do apologize because there's a lot of ground to cover, and I just want to make sure that you understand this because generally this is one of the most important concepts in all of economics. So thank you very much for listening. Okay, and you'll hear from me in the next lecture. And again, here are some image credits. All right, thank you.